Today celebrates 1 year of Westside Family Church being in Leavenworth. How cool is that? Let's give God a big hand. Yeah. It was 1 year ago today that we had our first and our last preview service. And the humor in this is we were going to have 3 preview services prior to Easter when we were going to have our grand opening, but we had over 400 people show up on that first service on January 10 of last year, and it blew our minds, and we just said, okay, we're just going to start meeting weekly. We had no plan to meet weekly until later, but we just made it all happen. You made it all happen. All of our leaders, we had a bunch of people just get involved in leading, and a year later, God has done some amazing things in changing people's lives, changing families, changing men, changing women, changing kids. Last year, we baptized over 44 people. That's amazing. That's something to give God a big hand about. That is awesome. We saw we saw 927 people come through our doors on the Christmas Eve service and hear hopefully an inspiring, encouraging, and Jesus-centered message. And all of our leaders made that happen. So I want to thank everyone who has given generously of their time, of their resources, financially to make Westside Family Church a place where people in a community, where people who are far from God can discover life in Jesus. And so thank you for making this past year an epic year. We believe 2017, God's going to continue to lead us and guide us, and we're going to continue to follow him. And that's what the series is. We're starting a series today called Follow Me. And the point of this series is to, remind us of 2 things. One, that follow me is a command. It's a command. But it's secondarily, and more importantly, not secondarily, it's primarily an invitation. And today I want to talk about the idea of an invitation. And I believe that invitations are easier to respond to than information. And maybe you agree with this, that you are more apt to respond to an invitation than information. And let me help you, come to this agreement with me. I want you to raise your hand, so let's participate a little bit in this. Be honest with me and be honest with your neighbor and your wife and or your husband. How many of you have ever done something you've regretted? Let's just start off. Yeah, if you're not responding, you're asleep, so nudge the person next to you. I mean, I hopefully am not that bad this early into it. So we've all done something we've regretted. We've all done something dumb and something that we would say, oh man, I wish I wouldn't have done that. And it wasn't for a lack of information, because sometimes we knew better. Sometimes we had plenty of information we knew enough to know better than to do that. But how many of us, the thing we regretted was in response to an invitation? And let me help you. Have you ever been double dared or double dog dared? You ever seen that movie to where you've been invited to do something? See, this is why you parents and us parents, yeah, you see it now. This is why you want your kids to have good friends. When they're growing up in high school, it's not that they don't know the information. You tell them time and time again. You give them all the information. This is the decision I want you to make. This is how you make wise choices. This is the wise choice. But you know that if the information not alone is not powerful enough to guard them, that the information, them knowing better, them knowing not to do something, or them knowing to stay away from danger, or them knowing not to hang out with those certain people, that it's not as powerful as the invitation from somebody. Because invitations, write this in. See, invitations are more powerful than information. They're more powerful than knowing better. They're more powerful than knowing what the right thing to do is. If you've ever done something you regretted, it might likely came through an invitation. See, invitations, they can change our position on things. You can write that in. Invitations can lead to a change in position. Have you ever been invited to read something? And through that invitation, that information came. And it wasn't necessarily that the information wasn't available, but it was through the invitation that it led to new information. And then all of a sudden you had a positional change. Maybe you thought differently about something or a certain topic. Maybe you were invited to a meeting at work. And because of that invitation to a meeting at work, you changed your position on something that was happening in the culture. Maybe you've had a friend, or not a friend, at the time it wasn't a friend, but you had a neighbor or somebody, a colleague that you just were irritated with, that just rubbed you the wrong way, and you kind of created a prejudice against them. And then all of a sudden that colleague or that neighbor invited you over maybe to their house. And you came over to their house, and when you came over to their house, you got to know a little bit about them, and your position on them changed. See, invitations are powerful. And you can know that their dog does something in your yard and all that, but the invitation becomes more powerful. And also, invitations lead to a change in direction. You can write that in. Because this is what I know about you, because I know this about me. At almost every major directional change in my life, every pivotal circumstance or pivotal change, every kind of mark where there was a fork in the road in my life where I chose to go one way, it was preceded by an invitation. Will you marry me? Now, I didn't receive that. I gave that. But it was an invitation. And before my wife responded to that, will you marry me, there was an invitation given to her. Hey, would you go out with me? And before that, there was, hey, maybe, and this is your case, hey, I've got a friend. Would you like to meet her? An invitation. And really, you maybe got married because, and it wasn't about information, because your mom and dad warned you about that person, told you not to go out with that guy or not to go out with that girl. And you knew all the information, but it was the invitation because that was more powerful. That was more compelling. There's something about the invitation that kind of trumps the information. And this is what I know is, I think the church, and this is like the big church, the global category of people who call themselves Christians. I think we've misunderstood that little concept. I think we've forgotten to lead with invitation, and instead we've led with information. And maybe you're here today and you're like one of two people. One, you've been hurt by church in the past because people shoved information down your throat. Or you felt like they extended to you all the to-dos, all this things of what being a Christian, quote unquote, is all about. And they led with that, but there was no invitation. There was no relational connection in this. And they led with it. And they kind of put a distance between you and what you would call the opportunity to become part of a church. Or maybe that put a distance between you and you had created this prejudice against Christians, which is rightly so, because guys like me that stand up on pulpits or platforms like this and maybe have a pulpit or preach from the Bible, we made it all about rules and to-dos and information. That being a Christian is about doing. And we've lost the invitation. And maybe you've been hurt by church in the past, and it was because of that people didn't lead with an invitation. And they leveraged information instead of leveraging the invitation. Invitations lead to direction, and this is also what I know. See, information without a prior invitation, you get this, leads to irritation. Isn't it irritating to be just shoved information down your throat? And that kind of pushes you away. When Cassie and I moved to South Africa, we moved to South Africa to plant a church, and it was at the invitation. Somebody extended us an invitation. Hey, would you consider? 2011, December of 2011, someone asked me, would you consider planting a Westside Family Church in South Africa? And that invitation got a big fat no from me. Quickly. Because why would I want to move to South Africa? Why would I uproot myself from here in the Midwest where I'm comfortable? Uproot all this and take my family, which was a 2-year-old boy at the time, my wife, and we just found out we were pregnant with my second-born, Genesis, and it's only a couple weeks old that we knew that information. We haven't even told anybody yet. Why would we do this? But that invitation grew in our hearts, and God led us through that invitation, and we eventually sold everything, and everything that we did we put in a 10-by-10 unit in DeSoto, Kansas, and we left, and with my family, with an 8-week-old girl, at the response of Jesus' invitation through an invitation of somebody else, we left to move to South Africa to plant a church. Crazy. See, we knew everything about South Africa. You don't move to South Africa just to move to South Africa. It was an invitation. And when we were there, we started this church, and as we were starting this church, we we didn't just start services. We started building relationships with people. And in building relationships with people, we met a lady on a game drive. See, in game drives there in South Africa, they put you in the cage and the animals roam free, totally unlike our zoos where we're free and they're in the cage. And so when we were on this game drive, one of the tour guides was named Danny. And she lived in Port Elizabeth like we did. And her boyfriend lived there, and we invited her and her boyfriend to come over to our house just to hang out. It was an invitation. And in this, she found out what we were doing, and she was quick to let us know that, hey, Casey, I mean, I appreciate it, but I want you to know you can't convert me. I'm an atheist. I go, great, I don't want to convert you. That's not my goal. I want to become your friend. Cassie and I and our family want to be your friend. And in this, we invited her to a braai. Now, a braai in South Africa is like an American barbecue, but on steroids, because there, for one thing, you don't just come over an hour and a half and you're done. This is like a 3 to 4 hour deal, and we had to learn this art of cooking for that long, and you do it over an open fire. And so we would have them over for braais, and we'd have them over often, and the people that we would invite were part of our church, and we would include them, and it was amazing because even her being an atheist, for her entire life, Christians tried to give her information. But she didn't need any information. She needed an invitation. And we extended to her an invitation. That invitation was just come hang out with us. Come be at our house. And whenever the conversation kind of went religious or went toward Jesus or went toward what we do in our conversation, because we wanted to make that an environment where people could talk about Jesus, have questions. And whenever it did, she was okay. We were okay if she went off into the corner or left the room, and we accepted her just like she was. We welcomed her to be without becoming like us. It was okay for her to be with us without believing like us. And it was all an invitation because we wanted to know Danny, and we wanted Danny to know us. And we wanted just to do life with Danny. You know, Jesus, that's how he operated. Jesus didn't really lead with information. It's not like Jesus who, if just so you know, Jesus, God in bod form, in God in a body, he comes down and he's going around. And it's not like Jesus went around and said, hey, by the way, I made you. Yeah, I started this whole thing. It was that plant over there. That's the actual name of this. And I told Adam, I helped him create that name. But let me tell you how that works. Let me tell you how you work. And by the way, I made you on day whatever, and day 6 I made you. And then in all this, I know all of this. And then I can also turn water into wine. Come on. He didn't lead with information about himself. You know what Jesus led with? He led with an invitation. He led with an invitation. He would say, come and see. And he would invite people constantly to come and experience who he was. Come and experience the life that he has that every one of us want. And he would invite us. And he wouldn't do it by saying, hey, I've got this seminar. He wouldn't invite people to church. He wouldn't invite them to his synagogue. He wouldn't invite them to his life group. He said, I want to invite you to come and discover who I am. And I want you to discover who I am because I have something to offer you that you can't offer yourself, and nothing around you and nothing you do can offer you. Only I can offer you. And he would invite people. He would invite people, and he would lead with the invitation. I want us to look today at a record of an invitation that we have, that Jesus invited a guy named Matthew. And it's in a book called Matthew, and it's chapter 9, so I want you to go there with me. You can look at it in your notes, or it's up on the screen. If you rather follow along in your phone or your device or your Bible, go ahead and do so there. As Jesus went from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at a tax collector's booth. And now let me just tell you why Matthew was at a tax collector's booth. He was a tax collector. And the reason this is so important, because tax collectors in this day were like the societal losers. Like they had a label. Nobody liked the tax collectors. In fact, they were the ones in the supermarket. Whenever you saw the tax collector, you would just go to the other aisle. You'd walk away from. And Jesus, a religious leader in the day, everybody was watching Jesus. He was gathering a crowd. People were informed of who Jesus was. People knew Jesus. And in this day, Jesus, who had all eyes are on Jesus, the religious crowds watching him, the religious leaders are watching him, the government leaders are watching Jesus. In this day, Jesus finds himself, and the people find Jesus going to a tax collector's booth named Matthew. And I bet everybody was watching to see what Jesus was going to do next. And Jesus goes to Matthew, A man totally unlike Jesus. Someone that men like Jesus did not associate with. And men like Matthew didn't associate with guys like Jesus. But Jesus goes up to this man named Matthew. And I want you to see what he gives and he says here. He says to Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth, "Follow me." I want you to circle those two words. I believe those two words are life-changing words. And he extends this life-changing invitation to Matthew. And this isn't like what you think follow me is, because we think through Twitter and Facebook. This isn't like click the like button or click the follow button, and then all of my life, hey, when I turn water into wine, it'll be right there on your page. You're going to see what I did. It's not, hey, click this and then you're going to get the account and my story and I'm going to tweet about it. No, it wasn't this at all. It wasn't follow me from a distance. This was an invitation that Jesus gave to Matthew to come close. To come close enough in my life and come close enough to me that what I have to offer can be yours if you accept the invitation to follow. And Matthew in this moment had a decision to make. And look what this moment in this invitation, Matthew said, hey, I've got everything I could ever want and need in material things, because that's what tax collectors had. They were wealthy, their houses were opulent, they would throw extravagant parties. And Jesus extends this invitation so much that Matthew gets up, he's like, well, let's go. And Matthew got up and followed him. And guess where he followed him to? We're going to find that here in a second. I want to tease you with that, but I want you to write this in your notes. See, Jesus invited people, unlike himself, to follow him. Jesus went to the people totally unlike him, like Matthew, and those were the ones he asked to follow him. He asked them to follow his way of life. He would go to those totally unlike them and ask them to follow him. And when Jesus asked Matthew to follow him, look at this. Look where he asked him to follow him. He goes, by the way, and I don't know how this interaction happened, so maybe Jesus is like, hey, Matthew, I want you to follow me, but I'm going to ask you, what are you cooking for dinner? Because they end up at Matthew's house. And maybe Matthew said, great, man, why don't you come over to my house? And Jesus is like, yeah, let's do this together, because, I want you to get close. I want to be close to you. And so Matthew invites Jesus over. Maybe Matthew had already a scheduled party that he would be throwing, which tax collectors would do in the day. And in this, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, look at this. He goes, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Now, it's interesting to me that the author here gives us two categories. He goes, hey, there's tax collectors, like society's losers, and then there's sinners. And the sinners are those who don't associate with those who are religious. So, those are the people that the religious crowd doesn't associate with. And maybe you're here today and you kind of feel like, man, yeah, I felt like I'm in a category, not that you're a sinner and you're labeled as a sinner, but you're in a category where man, religious people just don't associate with me. Or people that consider themselves Christians, they just don't really want to have anything to do with me. And that's the kind of people that Matthew, the writer of this account, says Jesus was hanging with people that the religious crowd didn't even associate with. And while Jesus was having dinner with them, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And I bet that made his disciples a little uncomfortable, because they only they never hung out with the tax collectors. They never hung out with this crowd. And Jesus takes all of them and they go to Matthew's territory and hang out with them. And you know what happens? Is those people that Matthew invited, I bet they loved Jesus. In fact, if you watch Jesus, write this in. See, the people most unlike Jesus liked Jesus. Everywhere Jesus went, he would find himself with the people that were most unlike him. And the people that were most unlike him, they liked Jesus, and they liked to be around Jesus because Jesus liked to be around them. But there's a crowd that didn't like that. In fact, the religious crowd saw Jesus hanging with the people that were unlike him, that they didn't like, and they knew that Jesus liked them and they liked Jesus, and they did not like that. And look what happens here. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, hey, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? Why does he associate himself with this? And, going to Matthew's booth was one thing, Jesus. Going to his booth was one thing, but now you're going to his house. You've entered his territory, one, but now you're entering into his life? What's the deal? Jesus, we don't do that. Teachers of the law don't do that. We separate ourselves. And Jesus, he didn't operate like that. In fact, an invitation with Jesus that Jesus extended was an invitation for Jesus to enter Matthew's life. And in this, Jesus said, he heard this, it is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. And then he goes, but go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. If you're gonna make a decision, I want you to decide on grace. And I want you, in a way, and this is my words, I want you to lead with an invitation, not just information. See, Jesus constantly led with invitation. And he would invite people. And he said, I want you to desire mercy. I want you to desire mercy, not sacrifice. And then he goes on to say, for I have not come to call. And I want you to circle that word call, because that word call is important. I'm going to get to that here in a second. But he goes, I didn't come here to call those who think they can do right, which is the righteous. Those who think they can live right, and somehow in your ability to live right, then God's okay with you. I haven't called them. I've come to call the sinners. Those who know that they can't be right with God in their own effort. Those who know that no matter how hard they try, that they're always one step short. That feel like that. That's who I've come to call, and that's who I'm going to. And that word call is interesting in the Greek language because it's like to call somebody by name. You're going to call them. And then it's to like, but it's also used interchangeably as an invitation. And Jesus came to invite the people that were unlike him, the people that were furthest from him, the furthest like him, you and I. And I don't care who you are, what your past may be, Jesus' invitation is also for you. If it's for Matthew, it's also for you. And Jesus does with Matthew something that he does with all of us, and he wants to do with you today. See, write this in. Jesus meets us where we are and invites us to follow him. That's what Jesus does. He meets you where you are. It's not like you have to, he didn't go to Matthew and say, okay, I want you to consider this, and if you agree to these terms, then I want you to meet me at the synagogue. No. Or if you agree to these terms, then you need to change the way you dress. Maybe you need to change who you're associating with, you're hanging out with and all that. You got to get rid of that tax collecting crowd. They're baggage to you, bro. You got to get rid of them. He doesn't say all of these. You know what he does? He just simply meets Matthew where Matthew is. He meets Matthew even in his terms. He meets Matthew at his location. See, Jesus follows up his invitation to meet Matthew where Matthew was. Right? Listen, there are no prerequisites to following Jesus. To follow him, you don't have to clean up before you show up. And maybe you're here today and you maybe resisted even coming today because you felt like things aren't in order in your life. And you feel like you need to get some things in order before you can kind of show up and present yourself to God and say, you know what, I'm kind of ready for you to help me. Many people are like that. And maybe you feel like that today, that you, in order for God to accept you, you've got to get to a certain place, or you've got to get rid of a certain friend, or you got to make some changes in your life for God to accept you. Or maybe, but I want you to realize, God accepts you where you are. In fact, he accepts you so much that he meets you where you are and extends to you an invitation that he extended to Matthew. Follow me. That's it. And what happens when we follow Jesus is amazing. And those of us who if we could share our story of following Jesus, I don't care if you've been following Jesus for 3 years or 30 years. When you follow Jesus and you look in the rearview mirror of your life and you kind of look back at yourself in perspective of where you are and where God's brought you as you've followed him, you know what I know? Is you look different. Because when we follow Jesus, we begin to think a little differently. When we follow Jesus, it's almost like he begins to give us new thoughts which change into new actions, and those actions become new habits. And all of a sudden, we address people differently. We talk to people differently. We choose different words because we're following him. See, an invitation that Jesus extends to you and I is an invitation that can change us. And it's an invitation that can change you. And it's an invitation that we receive every day of our life. I don't care if you're not following Jesus, he'll always be inviting you. And if you've followed Jesus for 30 years, every day you wake up is a new invitation for him to invite you. And the teaching big idea that I want to give you today is this, that when we say yes to Jesus' invitation, we'll experience transformation. When you say yes to Jesus' invitation that he gives you, that he gives everyone, follow me. It's not sign up to be a Christian, because Jesus wasn't a Christian. It's not sign up to do religious duty. It's not will you just simply follow me? And what's that look like, Casey? Does that mean that all of a sudden I have to become like somebody different? No. You know what following Jesus is? It's the same invitation for all of us. It's an invitation that Jesus invites me and he invites you to take our next step. Write that in. That's what following Jesus is about. It's an invitation to simply take your next step. And all of our next steps look different because all of us are in a different part of the journey. You're in one part of the journey, a different part of the journey than you over here. And each of us have our own individual next step in this journey of following Jesus. And that's the invitation. Every day he extends to you and I. Jesus invites us to seek out who he is and believe in him. Maybe you're here today and you consider yourself someone who's just trying to search for truth in life, trying to search for meaning in life, and you're trying to make new changes in your life, and that just brought you because somebody invited you today. And today you're here and you're just trying to discover maybe God, if you're really real, or Jesus, if you're really real, this is your invitation to seek him out, to search to discover who he is, to search to see if what he is and who he is really who he is and who we say he is. And we want to search him out so we can believe in him. See, to follow Jesus means that we search him out. We seek him and see, and we put our belief in him. And then also Jesus invites us to trust in his way of life and follow him. While seeking him is an opportunity, an invitation to get to know Jesus, when Jesus invites us to put our trust in him, it's almost like saying, hey, I want you to realize that the way you do life is not the real way to life. It's to realize that the life I give will bring true significance to your life. And this is an invitation he gives to every one of us. To search out who he is, to put our trust in him. And the way we show that God we trust him, show our God we trust him, is we put what he says into practice in our life. And every day you have an opportunity to put into practice what Jesus has been teaching you through the invitation that he's given. And it's an invitation that's more powerful than the information that you know. And it's an invitation from a God who loves you and a God who calls you and invites you to follow him. And when Jesus invites us, he invites us to join in his mission by sharing Jesus. That when you respond to this invitation, you will experience the purpose and the fulfillment that God wants for you to experience. The fulfillment that no job, no relationship, no career, nothing, no trophy, no certificate, nothing you can try to achieve will bring you. But in Jesus' invitation, you can find significance. In Jesus' invitation, you can find fulfillment. In Jesus' invitation, when you follow Jesus' invitation, it leads to life. And there's a warning label with this. Just like any warning label. Not that this leads to cancer like everything else does, okay? The warning is this. That if you do choose to follow Jesus, if you do choose to say, you know what? I'm going to give you a chance, Jesus. You're going to look in the rearview mirror of your life and you go, yeah, I am a little bit different. My life has changed. In fact, you might even use the word, it's transformed. I'm not even close to the person I used to be. And I'm so glad, because the person I used to be, I didn't really like. But I'm so glad that Jesus, who was not like me, liked me enough to call me, invite me to follow him. And now that I'm following him, I understand this. And this is the warning I want to give you. That when we follow Jesus, we'll likely end up loving Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and sharing Jesus. There's a strong chance that if you take your next step and follow him, you'll be one of these that end up loving Jesus. Why? Because you're going to discover how much God loves you. You're going to discover how much Jesus loves you, and you're going to end up becoming more like Jesus. Why? Because as you continue to put your trust in him and put his truth into practice into your life, as you trust in him, his Spirit's going to transform you. You're going to look different. You're going to talk to your wife differently. You're going to respond to your kids differently. Things that stressed you out before aren't going to stress you out as much, because you have been changed as you follow him. It's not every time is this once and done. It's a journey, a transformation. And likely, you'll end up sharing Jesus. You'll continue sharing the invitation of who he is. And you'll invite people to say, hey, why don't you follow me? Why don't you get close to my life and see who's the reason and who's behind this joy that I have? See this, and I want you to follow Jesus with me. See, follow me, not just a command, it's an invitation. And that invitation is a powerful invitation that can change your life, can transform you, can make you a better version of you. So what are you going to do with this invitation to follow Jesus? Matthew, he responded to this invitation. And when Matthew responded to the invitation, God used him in ways that we now know about, because this account of Jesus' story that we now have as the first gospel that is on every shelf almost in the world. Everybody in the world can own a copy of the gospel, at least the New Testament. And Matthew, a tax collector, is responsible for one of those accounts of Jesus' life. And his life changed. And it changed with an invitation. Follow me. My friend Danny, she showed up to our first church service. Not because she wanted to come to church, because she felt bad for us. She didn't think anybody was going to show up. And literally, that's what she told me. She goes, I just want you to know I came because I didn't feel like anybody was going to show up. And we'd invite her back over to our house. She wouldn't come necessarily to a church service, but she'd come over to our house. And she'd hang out with our people, and our people would invite her over to like game nights and things like that, and her and boyfriend. And all of a sudden, one day, Danny talks to one of our leaders and says, I think I'm ready to get baptized. There was no response. There was no prayer. But there was an invitation that she received that led to a next step, and all of a sudden, she's like, I'm ready to make my faith public and let people know that Jesus you invited me to has changed me, and I want to follow him. I want to invite you. Will you follow him? In your bulletin is a couple things that I want to invite you to. This is a part one of some opportunities that we're going to be having here at Westside. These are lifelines and life studies. We're going to be sharing some life groups in a couple weeks on the 29th of January. And this is what I want to ask. Maybe one of these is your next step in following Jesus. And for those of you that might be kind of searching to see who Jesus is or seeking Jesus and you're trying to develop a relationship with him, maybe your next step is Alpha. Alpha is an opportunity for you to explore who Jesus is, to search him, to get to know him. And as you get to know him, there are questions to help you get to know you and who you stand and who you are in light of who God is. And this is an invitation I want to give you. And there's information there that can help you get connected to that next step. Another next step I want to invite you to is all our ladies, I'd like to invite you to a women's conference. It's called IF, and it's a women's conference that'll be on February 3rd and 4th. And today there's an early bird special that we wanted to give you. So if you want to go to this conference and take your next step, maybe this is where you can help discover your next step and build some relationships with some other ladies to do this journey of life together. This is an opportunity for you, and today we'll give you a $5 discount. It's $30, not much anyway, but $25 covers food and some of the materials. And I want to invite you to sign up today to come to this IF conference. You can go online to the URL that's there in the handout, and you can sign up there by typing in early bird in the little window where it says the discount code, and you'll get a $5 discount. And we just want to invite you to that. Or you can sign up at the back there. We got an opportunity that you can sign up in the back of the room at our connection table. But I want to invite you. And maybe you're new with us. Come back. This is my invitation to you. Will you come back and join us next Sunday as we follow Jesus together? An invitation that if you take seriously and you take your next step, whether it might be coming back next Sunday, getting involved in one of these, or making a next step, hosting a life group or being involved in a life group, you'll look in your rearview mirror of life and see, God, you've changed me. Thank you. We're also going to have some prayer partners available after I pray for you right now. And if you'd like to pray with them about anything, they would love to pray with you. Can I pray for you now? Jesus, thank you. Thank you so much that your invitation to us doesn't require anything from us. And God, I'm so grateful that every one of us you've invited. Now, as we are here, there's many people on different parts of their journey. For some that are just trying to search for who you are, God, may you give them just a little bit of the courage they need to take that next step in following you. Maybe it's to attend Alpha, or maybe it's to just come back next week. Maybe it's to talk to their friend and just hang out with them some more and get to know them and the life that you are giving them and what their story is. God, for those of us that have been following you for years, it's still an invitation you give us to follow you. May we receive that invitation and take our next step in following you. And may you give us the courage to take that next step. And God, today, as we follow you, I know you'll change us. So that's my prayer. On this journey, will you continually change us as we are loving you, becoming like you, and sharing you by inviting people to follow you with us. In your name, Jesus. Amen.